about human factor engineering in AI and robotics. So let's welcome back our panelists. You've heard from all of them. I'm joined here by Arthur Lim, Carwin Hireman, and Dr. Tan Chit Seng. The panel will be exchanging insights on embedding quality assurance in solutions on AI and robotics. Facilitating this discussion is Mr. Oliver Tian, Honorary Advisor of APARA and Vice Chair of International Alliance of Robotics Associations. So over to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Elle. Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many of you staying back to listen to this panel discussion. After a full afternoon of very invigorating and insightful discussions, it brings us to the table to explore what's going to be next. Right? We heard from the different perspectives, right? From a very technical perspective down to the responsibility of technology, to the use of technology in AI, and we also have Iron Man in the picture as well. So that's wonderful. The part around how humans and machines are going to work together will bring up a very long discussion, because when we start to work together with machines, there are many factors we want to consider. Now, one of the key consideration is going to be quality. I guess the human expectations are going to be very high when we put machines together. It's no longer just a software, an application that runs on a desktop. Now this solution, this system is going to interact with you, work together with you. We need to think about the different features from the beginning, where we start to conceptualize, brand it, to communicating it, down to the development, the features we want to build into the system, and then the testing and the use of it. So we are going to kind of look at eventually at every phase of this development, right, between the man and machine coming together, the quality aspects, and that's going to be very key, right? So I'm going to start off with a simple round and ask our three panelists now in this forum to share with us their thoughts in one or two sentences. What is, in their view, human factor engineering? Right? What does it mean to them when we say human factors in development of an AI and robotic solution? So Arthur, I'm going to start with you. What do you think that means to you?
I think the key thing about the human in AI, right? It's, in my pitch earlier on, it's how does a human actually gain from the use of AI and robotics? Because at the end of the day, what it says, it's different from just an application on your desktop or an application on your mobile phone, right? But now moving into a more intimate realm, whereby your life may be dependent upon what the action of the robotics or the decision made by the AI is, right? So that's where the importance aspect of it, and that's how I see the relevance and the importance of human in that aspect.
Right? I like the discussion. What does the human, or how does human is going to gain from this combination, this interaction, right? And with AI becoming more intelligent, you're going to lift that level of interaction with humans. Dr. Tan, you talk about the use of AI in the medical space. I'm pretty sure that the human factor must be built into the medical systems, because it's so critical, especially when you talk about the life and death of patients sitting right in front of you. So what would you say are the key things of human factor engineering?
I would say that it's not going to be easy, and in healthcare we are still at the infancy, because we are looking at AI, in healthcare on the medical or the physician or the hospital side of things. We did not factor it from the patient side of things, factoring the patient's factors such as cultural differences, even mental capacity, such. So I would still think that AI in healthcare is still pretty much underdeveloped in that sense, because we are always looking on the easy data that we have gathered, the blood pressures, the surveys, the interaction but we did not see from the patient's point of view, or a lot of other factors. For example, the family factors. I'm in the long-term care space, so uh, I have to look at each patient more holistically. The social economical status, the living environment, family factors, the wish to live, for some, because I do palliative as well. So these are a lot of patients factor that I feel that has been sorely lacking in developing healthcare AI. And that is something that we should actually be looking into more.
That's a very excellent point because I see traditional software being developed based on a group of users who define uh, what the requirements are going to be. But what you're touching on now is the recipient of that solution, the recipient of that technology, the beneficiary. We have not taken that into consideration. And that brings us to actually a very interesting discussion because in order to encourage and get a lot of these users to adopt this technology, the whole process of communication becomes very key. Right? The whole process of how we brand this technology and articulate that across to the beneficiary of this technology is going to be very key. Whether they are the direct users or potentially investors who want to consider this technology. So I'm going to turn to Calvin and get your views on this, right? What do you think, from your perspective, right, in your interaction with investors and people who want to consider this technology, what are the key messages around human factor that, a startup perhaps needs to consider in talking to
Yeah.
investors?
Yeah, of course. First of all, the world is not made out of investors. Of course, we always want to aim at the greater purpose of every project. But you're right. If you want to get things off the ground, you do need to have a yeah, let's say communication methodology with your investors or with your first customers. And the story and what we see a lot in our small world here is that a lot of entrepreneurs have really fantastic ideas and their products are amazing and they're very skilled in moving that forward, but conveying the message and the benefits and the long-term vision to either investors or key stakeholders, potential customers, is not easy. It's often also sadly underestimated. So we really want to emphasize that the ingredients of success is, of course, the innovative spirit. That is clear. You need that. You need to be a risk taker. That's clear. But having a very ironed out strategy and communication plan towards your investors, I think is also yeah, pivotal in this. And while you do that, nobody speaks to an investor and gets funding in one go. So there is a learning curve in that. So you should also accept that when you go out there and you build your story, you shape your story, it can never be 100% accurate and correct on day one for two reasons. The first reason is that your technology will evolve, so you need to evolve your story. And of course, every time you tell your story, you get different feedback. You get often positive feedback, and you use that to build your story and complete your story even better. But my key point would be very careful. Technology needs to be there, and that's a whole world in itself. But you need to be able to brand your story to either investors or customers in a very very good way. That wasn't really needed. I would say 10 years ago or 15 years ago it was still a bit different. But these days, if you don't have a very clear digital marketing strategy, it's going to be a challenge. No.
Yeah, I can see what you mean, and in fact, in today's world, where we start to look at technology, the question will always be asked, how does it impact, how does it work for the beneficiary or the users? In fact, I have this question which I like to ask Arthur. Right? How different is it? I mean, compared to traditional software, how different is it to articulate the value of human factors or quality of human factors in technical solutions compared to the past?
Yeah. I mean, one of the key challenge is finding the right people getting involved, right? I mean, like what Dr. Jising was mentioning earlier on, right? We tend to design things very much from a business angle, right? What are the business requirements? What are the things that we need to do? And we make decisions, and we are so used to designing softwares out there. Now, pivoting to designing AI requires a totally different mindset altogether because you're no longer dealing with just very deterministic results that is going to be expected, right? So how do we actually, get the right input? And what I mentioned earlier on, right? The data set is where it's important driving the final outcomes for AI and robotics. But where to get the data set? And it's evolving over time, right? You talk to somebody this week, next week, when you talk to the same person, a change in what's happening around him will change the kind of inputs that you get from him as well, right? And therefore, that's why a methodology is needed, an evolving and I would say a continuous evolving methodology for modeling what AI is going to be important. And this where lies the difficulty. How do you keep changing a mechanism or a solution, right? While it's in development, while it's in operation, and getting it right. And the only way is, what was being mentioned earlier on as well, right? Getting the element of people, getting your stakeholders, getting the people, the eventual users in the loop, right? Now, one of the key challenge in that as well, I see, is that it depends on who you talk to, right? If you talk to just pure investors, they are looking for business outcomes, right? If you look at just pure users, they're going to look at what is in it for me, and I'm not going to be worried about the dollars and cents of it, right? So I think the big challenge in designing this is really how do you get the right people involved in the design and in the definition of the model, as well as the ultimate the algorithm that comes in. Because at the end of the day, it's all about evolving and getting it right. I won't say getting it right, but getting it close to what human would want to do.
You brought up a very interesting point, which I thought is worth discussing further. Right, one is the unexpected evolution, because when we put a design of a solution together, when we specify what we want, it is as if as it now, right? But when with couple of months down the road, as we start to develop the solution, the dynamics in the marketplace, the dynamics, the business environment is going to evolve and change, right? And I guess somewhere in the earlier presentation, we talk about the hidden needs of the user that may not have been expressed out. And because this AI solution, this robotic solution, is expected to interact a lot more than just a screen away, right? Hence, there will be unpredicted maneuvers or activities that's going to come out of the solution. And that makes it very difficult. And hence, we talk about the evolutional
Yeah.
approach to doing it. Sorry, Arthur.
No, I was just trying to maybe make another point here as well, right? We were talking about the trust element earlier on, right? And just like humans, human to human, right? Unless we trust a person, we don't really reveal a lot of information about what we want and how we see things as well. Very similar in providing information and data for AI and whatever that we need for designing the bots, right? So until we get accustomed to it, we may not be able to provide a full comprehensive set of inputs that is required to design it well.
And you said it right. I remember participating in a visit to a lab that was trying to show a bot picking up a bottle, a plastic bottle from the table. And it was easy, right? Because the bottle is stationary on the table, and the robot just need to use vision and all the techniques behind to grab the bottle and pull it up. But if now the bot needs to pass that bottle to a human, or for a human to pass the bottle to a bot, right? The calculation in terms of when do you release the pressure and when do you hold tight to the pressure and not get into a little struggle between man and machine, not letting go of the bottle is very interesting. It's quite intuitive, huh? For us to do the 4x4 relay, right? For example, where you pass the baton from one human to another, right? It's very intuitive for us.
Yeah.
But today, between man and machine, it's going to be difficult. And I guess Dr. Tan, maybe I'll come to you. And in the surgery room, right, when the machines are going to help you with the operation, for example, right? How do you make sure that between you and the machine in a procedure, you don't miss out a particular step that cause danger, right? So the man and machine interface becomes so critical, right? So maybe you can share your experience, perhaps not in the surgery space, but in terms of the medical space, right? Where the man and machine collaboration becomes so critical to the success of a particular procedure. Share with us your experience.
Okay, so in a healthcare sector, I guess a lot of the AI is still um, in in use in the healthcare administrative side. Not really, doing it on the using it on patient per se. Probably more in the imaging side. I mean, which of you have ever talk to AI chatbot now on your healthcare problem? It's not very common yet. Of course, some countries like in UK using Babylon Health, they have a bit more, as such. So I think in Singapore context, we are still limited to more uh, uh, diagnostic part, like your retinal picture, or based on the picture, the AI could, flag out the important points in the picture that helps the um, eye doctor see that where the pathology is. And these are still what we are currently thought of in AI, more of, the interpreting the data set that we have, and not really, touching the patient per se, you know, interacting with the patient per se. So, but in future, we are testing out, smart AI chatbot and all this. So we want to know what is the quality of the data that can be retrieved by the AI, because humans, like I mentioned, are the biggest black box. You can get different answer from the same human uh, when the mood of the human changes. Unfortunately, I always have patients like that. The elderly always change their minds, very often. So, in that sense, right, I think the AI is still now limited to, interpretation of data that we already retrieve, and not, getting new data from the patients. Yeah, and so that makes things easier, because then with our training, we can actually better use of the data as the AI as like a microscope. They make all the things that are different from norm bigger for us to interpret, so we can interpret them faster. So I guess that is the current situation, and not that advanced yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, you brought up a point around how the man and machine going to work together, right? So we're still talking about treating the machine as a dumb machine that is supposed to execute a small task, a small part of the job, not so much a role where you can collaborate and work together, right? And of course, Arthur talked about the trust factor, right? If you don't trust a machine to produce or collaborate with you, then the cooperation is not going to work, right? But that part is going to be difficult, right? Between two humans, it's going to take a while for you to build trust. It's not an overnight event, right? And there's no way you can say that you put the human into the best school, and what he turns out to be is going to be a great partner, right? So likewise, you can't say that you put a machine into the best training environment, the best testing environment, and when it comes out, it turns out to be a best partner. The one question in the psychology space is that we humans love to get into conflicts, and we enjoy that because as we conflict, we learn, and we learn how to collaborate. But with the machine, where it is not going to generate unexpected outcome, right? Every outcome you expect it to follow an algorithm and produce a predetermined outcome. Then we're going to look at the machine and say, you're so dumb, right? This machine is so dumb, and how are you going to have it collaborate with you? That status will probably put us in a case whereby the machines will never be elevated, and the fear of the machines taking over and all this sci-fi hype will probably stay as hype, and we need to make sure that that doesn't get past that stage. So in the communication process, Kavin, I'm going to come to you now, right? In the communication process, on how do we, when somebody put in a pitch and say that, we have got this AI solution. I love it when I read the papers and say, oh, somebody came out with this AI solution. But if you peel the onion further, you find that actually there's nothing behind that. They're just using jargons, right? So sometimes the jargons can mislead, right? The recipient of the information, to think that, wow, this is fantastic, or this is scary, but when actually it's not. So how can we put together a communication strategy that be clear, at the same time do not hype up unnecessarily,
Yeah.
to convey the wrong message? So what is your advice here, Kevin?
Yeah, that is sadly a common practice to hype up things. I would say, I mean, we cannot change the world, because there's a lot of people out there that overstate their technical performance through marketing routes. Sadly, if you want to, I think if you want to go for long-term success and you really want to make a difference, yeah, you need to calibrate your statements and your story with the reality of the terrain. And it's okay to talk about minimum viable products. It's okay to extrapolate your minimum viable product to a longer vision, and you can present that, and you can sell a vision. That is okay, but you cannot. I think it's very dangerous to make statements that once the technology is being stress tested and it doesn't follow, that would be, I think, immoral, and it would be, in the end, it just won't work. But so the advice is, of course, be in your communication. You can always give it a bit of an extra layer, but you got to be absolutely in line with the reality of the terrain. That is very important, because if you don't, you're just going to create disappointment along the road. And from the receiving end, if you hear about new technologies, you got to be cautious. And I think as an investor or as a potential user of the technology, yeah, there's a lot of distortion out there. So you do have to go through some real due diligence there on whether it really works as they say it works, of course. Yeah. But it's a good question, because there's a lot of I call it distortion. There's a lot of good people with good ideas out there, and but there's also, yeah, some stories that are a little bit too much floated and don't correspond to any true added value in the reality of the terrain. You know?
Yeah, I know. I mean, especially I get a bit frustrated when I read media reports, right, that they claim,
Yeah,
this technology uses AI, deep learning, machine learning, and neural nets, and
yeah,
they put in all the
I totally
jargons.
agree. Yeah, it's really a problem, because we have been working also with certain startups, and we listen to their story, and they use slang words like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and in the end, it's just an algorithm on steroids. So it is it is a problem. Yeah, yeah. There are truly good stories out there, but there's also a lot of yeah, pepping up the project with slang words like that. Yeah, it is clear. Yeah,
And that's kind of the direct opposite of what Dr. Tan is saying, right? He's very realistic, right? We're still at the infancy stage. I mean, honestly, if I look at all the sectors, right, the medical field is one that is, in my view, slightly more advanced already. And he believes it's still at the infancy stage. And others, they are claiming that it's done a lot more. The question is, how do we um, catch that gap, right? And maybe as one parting advice or takeaway for the audience, right, before we end this panel, is if you were to be consulting with an individual or team that wants to introduce AI into their organization, and more importantly, in the discussion of human factors, what will be one advice you tell the business owner to take a look at, right? What would be one advice you tell them, in the proposal of this investment to build such and such an AI solution? What would be one question or checkpoint you want to impose on that particular idea, you know. So maybe Arthur, we start with you. What would be one advice to make sure that the human factor is well considered in the development of the solution? Arthur, you're mute.
My apologies. So one part will be, I think, to me, right, as a potential user in the AI, right? What will be important to me, and as an investor, you have to look at that, is how do you explain to a lay person at the end of the day what that AI is doing? There is jargons all over. I mean, we just talked about that, right? There's so much jargons. Everybody just throw AI, machine language, and whatever not in their product. But are you able to exactly, describe, right, what that AI is actually doing? How is it actually coming to the final decision in terms of delivering the outcome that it is supposed to deliver, right? Because if you can't do that, then you are not going to be able to get the trust of the consumer or the person at the end of the day, right? If you can't articulate that, then you are not able to then make a very clear measurement of what the outcome of the product is supposed to achieve, right? So my point to the investor or developer or the business user, right? Go below the jargons that you do, right? Because that it sounds nice, but at the end of the day, are you able to convince the investors and are you able to deliver the product?
Okay, I get your point, right? To be able to articulate clearly the outcome expected from the
Yeah.
AI deployment, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Tan, what do you think? What would be one advice you give?
Very simple. Try it out. Give it a
Show me,
trial.
show
Yeah.
me, right?
Give it a trial for 3 months. That's what we are doing with two of the AI products actually for healthcare. We are trialing and we are comparing it to gold standards.
Okay,
One is an AI for measuring your vitals. We compare to the gold standard. One is an advice on consultation. We compare to the gold standards, which is human. Try it for 3 months.
okay.
Look at the pros and cons. Does it make the world better, or does it create more problem with the humans now? If it creates more problem, it may be useful. It may not be suitable
Mm.
for the process. Just try it. I think that is the single most pragmatic way to do it.
3 magic words. Try it out. Wonderful, wonderful. Calvin, what
I
would
have
you
to agree
say?
with that. Yeah, I think that machine learning, artificial intelligence, I think it's going to evolve, huh? But for the most common use case now, and I'm being careful here, is dealing with repetitive problems. So we see, for example, we're working with one customer now that has a solution that uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to reduce the number of false alerts in the compliance processes at banks. So there's a lot of processes out there that trigger false alerts, and for that they have a good use case, and it's clear. It's really clearly defined, and there is a problem there in the banking world. There's a lot of false alerts in compliance. So I think the most important um, element to consider is to define a problem statement in your organization and then ask yourself if artificial intelligence can play a role in that. It's not really so that it can always solve the problem at 100%. It should be seen as a process that can reduce the size of the problem. But you need to have a business case. So I agree with Arthur. You need to really define your own use case, business case to go for artificial intelligence, and not embrace artificial intelligence for the sake of innovation alone. You need to have a pragmatic use case. I think, yeah.
Wow, well said, well said. I mean, three of you, the 3 points that you mentioned are wonderful. One says being able to articulate clearly the outcome. 3 words advice from Dr. Tan, try it out. And I guess for you, Kevin, you're talking being able to be clear about the problem you're trying to solve. Um, I want to draw a little analogy, maybe in closing, to kind of allude to this. Um, the aspects of education and learning, corporate learning, for example, right, is starting to take a relook at how we can upskill the workforce. Right? Typically, as we all know, to go for training, you spend 1 week, 2 week in a environment, you sit down in a classroom, and what you get out of it is, a bunch of journal manuals that you probably don't refer to, and it's on the shelf collecting dust. Right? Um, the question is going to be, whenever you need a particular knowledge or skill, you know where you find it difficult to go and search through the manual, or you do not know where to go. So there's this concept called moment of need, right? You want to be able to have pockets, nuggets of knowledge available to you at the moment of need, right? And that's very critical. Um, and I guess in AI, it's probably going to be something similar. AI doesn't have to be a big monster that you're trying to create that's going to take 2 years to develop. You probably want something that comes to you when you need it. Right? In the moment of need, the AI is made available. And if you can define AI solution in the small little nuggets that support you, and then eventually build up the bricks to get something more practical, more pragmatic, it's probably easier to build and develop, or define in the first place, build and develop, and then test it out quickly before you move on. And that can come stack up eventually to a more complicated solution. So I want to take that message and then draw the attention to the audience, right? As mentioned earlier in the session, the webinar today, our host, Ms. Alpan, mentioned about a bonus workshop that we're trying to put together. This is around the theme of enabling AI in the moment of need, right? We believe AI can be built quickly, uh, in a very specific way, without making it too complex to fit a particular need. And if we can start to build trust based on these little nuggets that are efficient, that are effective, and can support you, right, in your workflow, over time we can build more and more complex structure around it. So to kind of home in on the three advice that the panelists have shared, right? Being able to clearly articulate the outcome. Well, if it's in a nugget form, probably easier to be clear about what you want to achieve. Try it out. Well, if it's not too big, right? You can build it quickly, try it out, and then look at how you can expand on it further. Or if it doesn't work, junk it away. And of course, that nugget is probably easier to define and be clear about the problem that we're trying to address. And that probably is the direction to go. So I will here invite all the audience to join us on the 23rd of September from 1 to 3 p.m. To attend this workshop to understand how that's going to work. And for the rest of the audience, I guess, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been wonderful to hear from the various experts. We have to wake up Dr. Helena Webb early in the morning to share with us a presentation, and she was also concerned that if she presents in the morning, she may not be fully awake, so she pre-recorded it for us. So that was very kind of her. And thanks to Mr. Arthur Lim, Mr. Manish Bal, Dr. Tanjit Singh, and Mr. Kavin Haiman for their advice, their insights, and all the contributions to the presentation. So this will bring us to the end of the session now. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I'll see you next Thursday for our next topic on AI and the future of learning. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.